Country music has always carried the weight of real life, its joys, its heartbreaks, and the quiet truths people hesitate to say out loud. Behind every voice that once echoed across American radios, there was a life filled with battles no spotlight could erase. Many of these artists gave us songs that felt like home, melodies that healed us, and lyrics that made us believe someone out there understood exactly what we were going through. But while their music lifted millions, the stars themselves often lived through years of pain, hidden sickness, and slow battles that ended far from the bright stages where they once stood. Some fought until their last breath. Some faded quietly, their suffering known only to those who loved them. And yet, every one of them left something behind. Something honest. Something that still resonates long after they are gone. Today, we honor 10 country legends whose final chapters were marked by illness, but whose stories still remind us why this genre is unlike any other. Their lives were raw, real, and unforgettable. And we begin with the man whose voice could fill stadiums, and whose spirit refused to break even as his body betrayed him. Toby Keith was more than a country star. He was a force of nature. Bold, unapologetically American, and unmistakably himself, Toby carried a presence that could quiet a room before he even sang a note. Born in Oklahoma, he worked in the oil fields and played football before chasing music full-time. That rough-cut, working-class grit shaped not only his voice, but the way he carried himself throughout his entire career. His hits, Should Have Been a Cowboy, courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, How Do You Like Me Now, weren't just songs. They were anthems sung in bars, rodeos, and stadiums across the country. Toby didn't just represent country music. He represented an entire American spirit, defiant, proud, unfiltered, and deeply loyal. But behind the loud guitars and giant stages, Toby was facing a battle far tougher than anything fame had ever thrown at him. In late 2021, doctors told him he had abdominal cancer. He kept the diagnosis private at first, trying to face it the same way he faced everything else, head-on, quietly, and without asking for pity. He went through rounds of chemotherapy, surgeries, treatments that left him exhausted. And yet, he still walked on stage whenever he could. Every time he felt strong enough to sing, he chose to share that strength with his fans. When Toby finally revealed his illness to the world, he did it the way only he could. Straightforward, calm, without dramatics. He told fans he was fighting and that he would keep fighting. And he did. But on February 5th, 2024, the news broke that Toby Keith had passed away at the age of 62. The country music world was stunned. He had seemed invincible, larger than life. A man whose voice felt like it could outshout anything, even cancer. Fans, friends, and fellow artists flooded social media with tributes. They all said the same thing. Toby was a fighter until the very end. His music still roars across the American landscape, from dusty backroads to packed arenas. And even though he's gone, the fire he lit in country music isn't going anywhere. Charlie Pride, trailblazer long before the world ever called him a legend. In a genre dominated almost entirely by white performers, he walked onto the stage with nothing but his voice and a courage that would help reshape country music forever. Born in Mississippi, he worked hard from the beginning, first as a baseball player in the Negro Leagues, and later as a young man chasing a dream few believed was possible for him. But when Charlie Pride opened his mouth to sing, doubt disappeared. His voice was smooth, warm, and full of a quiet honesty that made listeners stop what they were doing and simply listen. With classics like Kiss an Angel Good Morning, Is Anybody Going to San Antone, Mountain of Love, and countless others, he became the first black superstar in country music and one of the most respected voices the industry had ever seen. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Charlie wasn't just successful, he was shaping the very direction of country music. He topped charts, won awards, and made history when he received the CMA Entertainer of the Year in 1971. A win so groundbreaking, it still stands as one of the most significant moments in country music history. Even as he grew older, Charlie never stopped doing what he loved. His voice remained rich, steady, and unmistakable. Fans didn't just admire him, they cherished him. He carried himself with grace, humility, and a sincerity that made every performance feel personal. But in late 2020, After his final public appearance at the Country Music Awards, Charlie's story took a sudden and heartbreaking turn. He contracted COVID-19, and the complications quickly worsened. For a man whose voice had carried across every corner of America, the disease took something precious, his breath. On December 12, 2020, Charlie Pride passed away at the age of 86. His death shook the music world. Generations of artists, black, white, young, old, spoke about what he meant to them, how his courage had cleared paths they could walk on today. Charlie Pride didn't just leave songs behind. He left a legacy of possibility, of breaking barriers, of proving that music, at its core, belongs to everyone. Glen Campbell, knee of those rare artists whose talent felt almost impossible to measure. Singer, guitarist, television personality, whatever stage he stepped onto, he dominated with an ease that made everything look effortless. Before he ever became a star in his own right, Glen was already a force behind the scenes, playing guitar for legends like Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra. His skill was undeniable, and everybody in the business knew it. But when he finally took the spotlight for himself, country music gained one of its brightest voices. With songs like Wichita Lineman, Gentle on My Mind, By the Time I Get to Phoenix, and the iconic Rhinestone Cowboy, Glen didn't just sing. He painted vivid stories, blending country and pop in a way few artists had ever done successfully. His sound was smooth, emotional, and instantly recognizable. In the 1970s, Glen became a household name across America. He hosted the Glen Campbell Good Time Hour, bringing music, laughter, and charm into millions of living rooms. Fans adored him, fellow artists admired him, and the industry rewarded him with accolades, including Grammys spanning decades of creativity. Even late in life, Glen's work continued earning praise, proof that true artistry never fades. But behind the bright television lights and the applause of sold-out venues, Glen was fighting a battle he couldn't outplay, outsing, or outshine. In 2011, he revealed to the world that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, a cruel condition that slowly steals memories, abilities, and even the sense of self. For a man whose life was built on lyrics, chords, and stories, it was a devastating blow. Yet in true Glen Campbell fashion, he chose courage instead of silence. He embarked on one final tour, his goodbye tour, wanting to say farewell the only way he knew how, through music. Fans watched as he performed with grace, even when lyrics slipped away or timing grew uneven. Every performance felt like a testament to his love for the craft and to the unbreakable bond between Glen and the people who had followed him for decades. On August 8th, 2017, Glen Campbell passed away at the age of 81 after his long battle with Alzheimer's. His family, fans, and the entire music community mourned not just the loss of a star, but of a soul whose songs had shaped the sound of American country music. Glen's memory may have faded from him, but it will never fade from us. Tammy Wynette, just a country singer, she was the voice of heartbreak, resilience, and raw, unfiltered womanhood. Long before the world called her the first lady of country music, she had already lived through chapters of struggle that would later shape the emotional weight behind every lyric she delivered. Her songs weren't performances. They were confessions, whispered straight from a wounded heart to anyone who needed to feel understood. With timeless classics like Stand By Your Man, Divorce, and Till I Can Make It on My Own, Tammy became a symbol of strength wrapped in vulnerability. She sang about love, pain, betrayal, endurance, topics she knew intimately. Fans connected to her because she never tried to hide the rough edges of her life. She turned them into something powerful. But behind her luminous stage presence, Tammy was enduring a long, grueling battle that few people fully understood. Throughout her adult life, she suffered from severe and chronic health issues involving her stomach, intestines, and liver. Her condition forced her through dozens of surgeries, relentless physical pain, and a dependence on strong medications just to get through the day. There were moments when she could barely stand, but she still walked into recording studios and stood under stage lights to sing. Her voice somehow never lost its intensity. Even when her body was failing her, her delivery remained filled with the same emotional fire that first made America stop and listen. It was that paradox, fragility and strength intertwined, that made Tammy Wynette unforgettable. On April 6, 1998, Tammy passed away at the age of 55. At first, the world was told she died from a blood clot in her lungs. Later reports revealed the fuller truth. Heart failure worsened by years of ongoing health complications. Her departure shocked the industry. It felt sudden, unfair, like a candle burning too hot for too long. But in a way, Tammy had already left everything she had to give in her music. Every ounce of pain she lived with found its way into the songs that millions still play today. To this day, her legacy is not defined by her suffering, but by the honesty she poured into every note. She taught country music something invaluable, that the truest stories come from the deepest wounds. Ray Price, that seemed carved from steel and velvet all at once, strong, smooth, and unmistakably his. In a genre filled with giants, Ray didn't just stand out. He changed the shape of country music itself. Few artists could reinvent the sound of a generation, and even fewer could do it twice. Ray Price did both. He began by championing the honky-tonk style, refining it, sharpening it, and giving it a punch that electrified dance halls across America. But Ray was never content to stay in one lane. As the years passed, he embraced lush string arrangements and richer orchestrations, creating a smoother, more sophisticated sound that blurred the lines between country and soul. Many purists resisted at first, until they heard what Ray could do. Then, they followed. With a career that spanned more than 60 years, Ray Price didn't chase trends. He set them. Songs like For the Good Times, Crazy Arms, and Heartaches by the Number became staples of country music, covered by countless artists but rarely equaled. His voice had a rare quality: bold, emotional, and precise, capable of cutting straight through to the core of a listener's heart. But even legends are not immune to the battles that life quietly prepares for them. In 2012, Ray received a devastating diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, one of the most aggressive and unforgiving forms of the disease. He fought with the same determination he brought to his music. He underwent treatment and continued to perform whenever his body allowed it, insisting that the stage was where he still belonged. For a moment, there was hope. But the cancer returned in 2013, stronger and spreading quickly. Ray made the decision that many courageous fighters eventually face: to stop treatment and spend his final days in the comfort of his home, surrounded by the people who loved him. On December 16, 2013, Ray Price passed away at 87 years old. His death marked the end of an era, but his influence remains woven into the very fabric of modern country music. Generations of singers, whether they realize it or not, sing in the wake of Ray Price. He didn't just perform songs. He built a blueprint that countless artists still follow today. Ray Price left behind a legacy defined not by the illness that claimed him, but by the fearless innovation and unwavering passion that made him one of the most important voices in country music history. George Jones. He was the embodiment of heartbreak. His voice carried a gravity that felt almost supernatural, as if every note had been soaked in a lifetime of regret, love, and lessons learned the hard way. When people call him one of the greatest vocalists in the history of country music, they aren't exaggerating. They're simply stating a truth everyone feels the moment he opens his mouth to sing. With classics like He Stopped Loving Her Today, often called the greatest country song ever written, George didn't just perform, he confessed. His voice cracked, trembled, and soared with a sincerity that made listeners believe every word. His gift wasn't just technical skill, it was emotional precision, the ability to turn pain into poetry. But George's life wasn't defined by success alone. Through the decades, he fought personal demons that became almost as legendary as his music. For years, he battled alcohol and substance struggles that nearly derailed his career more than once. Yet somehow, every time people thought he was gone for good, George Jones clawed his way back. When he eventually got clean, his focus returned completely to music, and fans embraced him with open arms. As he grew older, the consequences of those chaotic years began to take their toll. A lifetime of smoking and drinking had severely damaged his lungs. George was diagnosed with chronic respiratory issues, and breathing, something so many of his songs once seemed to take away from listeners, became increasingly difficult for him. He canceled shows, endured hospital stays, and tried to manage the relentless decline of his health. In April 2013, George was admitted to the hospital once more, this time with a high fever and severe breathing problems. Fans held their breath, hoping the man who had survived so much would pull through again. But on April 26th, 2013, George Jones passed away at the age of 81 from respiratory failure. His death marked the end of a chapter in country music that can never be rewritten. The world didn't just lose a singer. It lost a voice that defined an entire emotional language within the genre. But even now, when his songs play, it feels like George Jones is still sitting beside us, telling stories the way only he could. And maybe that's why his legacy endures, because no one before or after him has ever sounded quite like that. Roger Miller, like anyone else in country music. While many artists built their careers on heartbreak and solemn storytelling, Roger carved out a place entirely his own, playful, witty, and brilliantly unconventional. His songs were filled with humor, clever wordplay, and melodies that seemed to dance in the air. And yet, beneath the jokes and lightness, there was always a deeper truth. That was Roger's gift. He made the complicated feel simple, and the simple feel unforgettable. Born in Texas and raised across Oklahoma, Roger grew up poor and spent much of his young life doing hard labor, picking cotton, working odd jobs, and dreaming of something more. Music became his escape. He began writing songs for other artists before finally stepping into the spotlight himself. When he did, everything changed. Hits like Dang Me, Chug-a-Lug, and the timeless King of the Road turned him into a national sensation. Roger didn't sound like anyone else, and he didn't want to. His unique blend of humor, rhythm, and gentle melancholy earned him 7 Grammy Awards in a single year, an astonishing record that no other country artist had achieved at the time. Over his lifetime, he collected 11 Grammy wins, proving that behind the playful grin was one of the sharpest musical minds the genre had ever seen. But Roger's life wasn't all laughter. Years of heavy smoking caught up with him, silently damaging his lungs and throat. When doctors finally diagnosed him with lung cancer, it was devastating news. Not just because of the illness itself, but because it threatened the very instrument that had carried him through life, his voice. He underwent treatment and fought the disease, but the cancer spread quickly. His voice weakened, his body grew tired, and even speaking became difficult. In his final months, Roger stayed at home surrounded by family, cherishing the quiet moments that illness had forced upon him. On October 25, 1992, Roger Miller passed away at the age of 56 from lung and throat cancer. His death felt like the dimming of a rare light in country music, one that had burned differently, brightly, and joyfully. Even now, when King of the Road drifts from a speaker, there's an unmistakable Roger Miller magic in it. A reminder that humor and heart can coexist, and that sometimes the most profound stories are the ones told with a smile. Dan Seals, musical life in 2 remarkable chapters. First as part of the soft rock duo England Dan and John Ford Coley, and later as a country star whose voice carried warmth, sincerity, and emotional honesty. No matter the genre, his sound always felt unmistakably human. Quiet, gentle, thoughtful, Dan Seals never tried to be the loudest person in the room. He simply let the music speak for him, and millions listened. When he transitioned fully into country music, fans embraced him instantly. Hits like Bop, Everything That Glitters Is Not Gold, You Still Move Me, and Love on Arrival showed a depth and sensitivity that set him apart from many of his peers. He wrote about family, love, heartbreak, and the fragile moments between them. And offstage, he was known as a private soul, a man who never acted like a star, even though he had every right to. But in 2008, Dan's quiet life was shattered by devastating news. He was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a serious cancer affecting the lymphatic system. From the moment he heard the words, he began fighting with everything he had. He endured intense treatments, including chemotherapy and a stem cell transplant. For a brief moment, there was hope. The cancer seemed to retreat, leaving his family, fans, and doctors cautiously optimistic. But hope can be a fragile thing. The cancer returned, and this time it spread faster, hitting harder than before. Dan's health declined quickly. The man who once filled concert halls with gentle lyrics and soft melodies now spent much of his time in hospitals, fighting just to stay alive a little longer. His loved ones described these final months as a period of both suffering and profound grace. Dan remained kind, patient, and calm, even when the pain grew unbearable. On March 25, 2009, Dan Seals passed away at the age of 61 after a long, exhausting battle with cancer. He was laid to rest in Woodlawn Memorial Park in Nashville, near the resting place of his brother, close enough that the two could symbolically remain side by side. Though his career never chased the brightest spotlight, Dan Seals left behind something rarer: music filled with heart, humility, and truth. His songs still move people because they were written by a man who understood life's quietest, most tender moments and gave them a voice. Johnny Paycheck, the kind of country singer who didn't just perform hard-living songs, he lived them. With a gritty voice, a rebellious spirit, and a no-nonsense attitude, he became one of the genre's most unforgettable figures. His biggest hit, "Take This Job and Shove It," wasn't just a chart-topping anthem. It became a rallying cry for working people everywhere who felt pushed too far and underappreciated. Johnny didn't sugarcoat anything. He sang about frustration, grit, raw emotion, and the messy truths of everyday life. Before rising to fame, Johnny played bass for some of the biggest names in country music, including George Jones. On stage, he had a fiery presence, unpolished, real, and electrifying. Fans loved him for it. He wasn't perfect. He never claimed to be. He let the rough edges show, and that honesty made him stand out in a world that often tried to smooth everything down. But the wild lifestyle that shaped his music came with a price. Years of heavy drinking, smoking, and hard living began eating away at his health. What felt rebellious and unstoppable in his youth slowly turned into a burden his body could no longer carry. As he aged, he was diagnosed with emphysema, a severe lung disease that makes it painfully difficult to breathe. He also battled asthma and multiple lung-related complications. Performing, a thing he once did with fire in his voice, became harder and harder. He canceled shows, spent increasing amounts of time in hospitals, and eventually stepped away from the spotlight altogether. The man who had spent decades singing about life's toughest truths was now enduring one of his own: the fight for every breath. On February 19, 2003, Johnny Paycheck passed away in Nashville at the age of 64. The official cause was respiratory failure caused by long-standing lung disease. He was laid to rest at Woodlawn Memorial Park, the same cemetery where so many country legends have found their final place. Johnny Paycheck's story is often framed as turbulent, and it was. But that turbulence created some of the most honest songs the genre has ever heard. His legacy is one of authenticity, a reminder that country music is, at its core, about real people living real lives, however messy they may be. Yet when it found him, his voice carried a depth that could stop listeners in their tracks. Rising to fame in the early 1990s, Doug became known for songs that felt painfully honest and deeply human. His biggest hit, "I Don't Call Him Daddy," told the story of divorce and fatherhood with such tender sincerity that countless listeners felt as if he were singing their lives back to them. More hits followed, including Reno and Not Enough Hours in the Night, each carrying his trademark emotional weight. Born and raised in Texas, Doug carried his roots proudly in both his music and his character. There was nothing flashy about him, no extravagant persona or loud public presence. He simply sang the truth, plain, raw, and from the heart. During his early rise, it seemed like Doug was on the verge of becoming one of the genre's great storytellers. But life has a way of shifting paths unexpectedly. By the late 1990s, Doug slipped from the spotlight, stepping away from the constant demands of touring and fame. For years, he stayed quiet, almost forgotten by the mainstream. Then, in 2016, something remarkable happened. Doug returned to music. He began performing again, and fans who hadn't heard his voice in years felt as if an old friend had finally come home. But just as this new chapter began, tragedy followed. In 2019, Doug was diagnosed with stage 4 lung and bladder cancer. By the time doctors found it, the disease had already spread, making treatment incredibly difficult. He fought hard, but the cancer moved faster than anyone hoped. Within just over a year, Doug's condition worsened dramatically. On November 13th, 2020, Doug Supernaw passed away in Texas at the age of 60. He was buried in his home state, close to the land and the people he loved most. Fans mourned not just the loss of a country singer, but the loss of a storyteller whose voice carried a rare, honest tenderness. Doug Supernaw may not have been the most famous name in country music, but for those who listened, really listened, his songs cut deeper than most. His story is a reminder that greatness isn't always measured by charts or awards. Sometimes it's found in the quiet truth of a song that stays with you long after the last note fades. It's a reflection of real lives lived with courage, heartbreak, grit, and grace. The 10 artists we revisited in this journey weren't just singers. They were storytellers, pioneers, rebels, and poets. Their voices shaped eras, healed broken hearts, and became the soundtrack of American life. Yet behind the applause, behind the lights and the records and the fame, each one carried battles that the public rarely saw. Toby Keith fought with the heart of a warrior. Charlie Pride broke barriers with quiet strength. Glenn Campbell faced fading memories with unshakable dignity. Tammy Wynette turned pain into anthems that still echo today. Ray Price reinvented country music twice. George Jones poured every scar of his life into a voice unmatched in its emotion. Roger Miller taught us that humor and heartbreak can live side by side. Dan Seals sang with gentleness even as illness took his strength. Johnny Paycheck lived fiercely, sang honestly, and left nothing behind unsaid. Doug Supernaw returned to music when no one expected him to, only to be taken far too soon. Their final battles, cancer, respiratory disease, heart failure, Alzheimer's, were cruel, but their legacies remain untouched. Because in the end, illness could take their bodies, but not their stories. Not their voices. Not the imprint they left on millions of lives. Every time Rhinestone Cowboy drifts from a radio, every time someone whispers, "Stand by your man," through their tears, every time a dusty bar erupts with, "Take this job and shove it," every time a father listens to "I Don't Call Him Daddy" and feels understood, they live on. Country music has always belonged to the people, to those who hurt, those who heal, and those who dare to feel deeply. And these 10 legends gave us the courage to do exactly that. If one of their stories touched you today, tell us in the comments. Which of these artists shaped your life, your childhood, or your love of country music? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want more journeys like this. More untold stories, more forgotten legends, more hearts that shape the sound of America. Because in country music, no one is ever truly gone. Not as long as we keep listening.